The rain pelted the cracked pavement of Brooklyn, each drop a tiny explosion of regret in my chest. I stood frozen. The words I'd screamed at Eli echoing louder than the storm. You're the worst man alive. And I'm done with you. Now, hours later, the memory of his shattered expression haunted me. A ghost I couldn't outrun. My name is Caleb. 25. A graphic designer scraping by in a city that chews up dreamers like me. Eli, my boyfriend of 2 years, was the opposite 27. A paramedic with a heart too big for his own good. We met at a dive bar. His easy laugh cutting through my cynicism like sunlight through fog. But lately, our love felt like a tightrope, stretched thin by my insecurities and his relentless selflessness. The test was my stupid idea. Late-night argument spiraled into me hurling accusations, daring him to prove he wasn't the selfish jerk I painted him to be. I didn't mean it. I never did. But words, once spoken, don't care about intent. That night, I sat in our cramped apartment, staring at my phone. No texts, no calls, just silence, heavy as the rain outside. I replayed our fight, my voice, sharp and cruel, calling him out for always putting his job first, for canceling plans to save strangers. You care more about them than me. I'd spat, ignoring the exhaustion in his eyes, the way his hands trembled from a 12-hour shift. He'd stood there, taking it, until I delivered the final blow, the worst man alive. He left without a word, his jacket still slung over the couch. By midnight, guilt gnawed at me. I paced, the walls closing in, my mind conjuring images of him walking away forever. Then my phone buzzed a call from an unknown number. Caleb Harper. A woman's voice asked, clipped and professional. This is Street. Luke's hospital. Eli Carter's been in an accident. The world tilted. My knees hit the floor, the phone slipping in my sweaty grip. What happened? I managed, voice cracking. She explained, Eli's ambulance had been T-boned by a drunk driver while rushing to another call. He was in the ER. Critical but stable. I don't remember grabbing my coat or the cab ride through the storm. All I saw was his face. Those hazel eyes that always found me in a crowd, now possibly closed forever. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and fear. I stumbled to the ER, my sneakers squeaking on the linoleum. A nurse led me to a curtained bed where Eli lay, tubes snaking from his arms, a bruise blooming across his cheek. His chest rose and fell, fragile but steady. I sank into the chair beside him, tears burning my eyes. The man I'd called the worst was here, broken, because he'd been saving someone else. I reached for his hand, cold and still. I'm sorry, I whispered, the words too small for the weight of my regret. The monitors beeped, indifferent to my confession. I thought of the past 2 years, his late-night stories of lives saved, the way he'd hold me after my worst days, his quiet strength anchoring me. And I'd repaid him with a test he didn't deserve. A doctor interrupted, her voice gentle but firm. He's got a concussion, broken ribs, and internal bruising. He's lucky to be alive. Lucky. The word felt like a slap. I nodded, unable to speak. My eyes locked on Eli's face. The doctor left, and I stayed, counting his breaths, each one a fragile promise he'd wake up. Hours passed, or maybe minutes, time blurred in that sterile room. I thought of the first time he kissed me, under a streetlight in Greenwich Village, the world fading until it was just us. I thought of our plans, a trip to Maine, a dog we'd named Scout, a life we'd build despite the chaos of the city. Now, all of it hung in the balance because of my reckless words. I leaned closer, my forehead against his knuckles. You're not the worst, I murmured. You're the best thing I've got. The rain outside slowed, But the storm in me raged on. A mix of fear, love, and the desperate hope that he'd hear me. The hospital's fluorescent lights buzzed like a swarm of angry bees, drilling into my skull as I sat by Eli's bed. His hand, still limp in mine, felt like a lifeline I didn't deserve. I kept replaying the fight, each word a shard of glass cutting deeper. You're never here. Eli, you choose them over me. It wasn't true. Not really. Eli's job as a paramedic wasn't just a paycheck, it was who he was. I'd seen him run into burning buildings, calm panicked strangers, and stitch lives back together with steady hands. But jealousy, that ugly beast, had clawed at me every time he left our apartment. Radio crackling. I's already somewhere else. I wanted to be his priority, not the guy waiting at home with cold takeout and a bruised ego. The ER was a cacophony of beeps, hurried footsteps, and distant sobs. I barely noticed. My world narrowed to Eli's shallow breaths. A nurse came by, checking his chart. He's a fighter, she said, her smile kind but tired. Kept asking about you before he passed out. Her words hit like a punch. Even as he bled, Eli was thinking of me, and I'd called him the worst. I pulled my chair closer, the metal scraping the floor. My mind wandered to last summer, when we'd driven upstate to a lake house his cousin lent us. Eli had taught me to skip stones, laughing when I sank every one. At night, we'd lain on a creaky dock, stars above, his arm around me. This is enough, he'd whispered. Just you and me. I'd believed him then. Why couldn't I believe it now? Guilt wasn't my only companion. Fear coiled tight, whispering what-ifs. What if he didn't wake up? What if my last words to him were that cruel lie? I thought of his mom, a tough woman in Queens who'd raised him alone. I hadn't called her yet, couldn't face her knowing I'd hurt her son. But I owed her the truth, didn't I? I fumbled for my phone, hands shaking as I dialed. Mrs. Carter. My voice cracked. It's Caleb. Eli's. He's in the hospital. Silence stretched. Then her sharp intake of breath. What happened? She demanded. I told her about the crash, leaving out our fight. She didn't need more pain. I'm on my way, she said, and hung up. The wait was torture. I studied Eli's face, memorizing the curve of his jaw, the faint scar above his eyebrow from a childhood fall. He'd told me that story over coffee, his eyes crinkling with laughter. Now, those eyes were closed, and I'd give anything to see them again. I brushed a lock of hair from his forehead, my fingers lingering. You have to wake up, I said, voice low. I need to tell you I was wrong. A doctor returned, updating me. The internal bleeding was under control, but the concussion worried them. He needs rest, she said. Talk to him. It might help. So I did. I talked about our first date, how he'd spilled beer on his shirt and laughed it off. I talked about the night he came home smelling of smoke, eyes haunted, but still held me until I fell asleep. I talked until my throat ached, hoping my voice could reach him wherever he was. Mrs. Carter arrived, her face a mask of worry and resolve. She hugged me, surprising me with her strength. He loves you, Caleb, she said, her voice steady despite her red eyes. Don't you forget that. I nodded, tears spilling. She sat on the other side of Eli's bed, taking his other hand. We were a silent vigil, two people tethered to the man we both loved, waiting for a miracle. Mrs. Carter's presence was a quiet anchor, her hand gripping Eli's like she could will him back to us. The ER's chaos faded into a dull hum, and I felt the weight of my words to Eli settle deeper. I'd called him the worst man alive, but sitting here, watching his chest rise and fall, I knew I was the one who'd failed him. I thought back to the test me stupid. Impulsive test. It started as a jab. A way to vent my frustration after he'd missed another dinner. I'd been scrolling through my phone, reading some toxic online thread about testing your partner's loyalty. The idea stuck like poison. Push him to his limit. See if he'd choose me. So I'd picked a fight, accusing him of neglecting me, daring him to prove his love. His silence had infuriated me, and I'd escalated, hurling that final, unforgivable insult. He'd left for his shift, and now here we were. Caleb, Mrs. Carter said, pulling me from my spiral. You look like you're carrying the world. Talk to me. Her eyes, so like Eli's, held no judgment, only concern. I hesitated, then let it spill the fight. The test. My cruel words. She listened, her face unreadable, until I finished, my voice barely a whisper. You're human, she said finally. We say things we don't mean when we're scared. Eli knows you love him. Her words were a lifeline, but they didn't erase the guilt. I wanted to believe her, but the image of Eli's hurt eyes before he walked out kept replaying. A nurse interrupted, checking Eli's vitals. He's stable, she said. The next 24 hours are critical for the concussion. Mrs. Carter nodded, her grip on Eli's hand tightening. I felt useless, a bystander in my own life. I wanted to fix this, to take back every word, but all I could do was wait. I thought of our early days, when love felt effortless. Eli would leave sticky notes on my laptop, dumb jokes, or I love you in his messy scrawl. I'd kept every one, a shoebox full of his heart. Now, I imagined those notes burning, my anger reducing them to ash. I leaned forward, whispering to Eli, I kept all your notes, even the one about the zombie apocalypse. A tear hit his hand, and I wiped it away, ashamed. Mrs. Carter stood, stretching. I'm getting coffee. You want some? I shook my head, unable to leave Eli's side. She squeezed my shoulder before walking away, leaving me alone with him and my regrets. I traced the lines of his palm, remembering how he'd hold my hand during scary movies, pretending he wasn't scared. He was always the brave one. The hospital clock ticked past 3 a.m. My eyes burned, but sleep was impossible. I thought of the future we'd dreamed of, moving out of the city, maybe adopting a kid someday. Eli wanted that, wanted us to be a family. And I'd jeopard agreed, scared but willing because it was him. Now, I'd give anything to tell him I was all in. A faint twitch in his fingers stopped my breath. I stared, heart pounding, but they didn't move again. Eli, I whispered, desperate. Nothing. Just the steady beep of the monitor. I sank back, hope flickering but not gone. I'd wait as long as it took. He'd fought for so many others. Now it was my turn to fight for him. The hospital's sterile air clung to my skin, heavy with the scent of disinfectant and unspoken fears. Eli's hand, still limp, felt like a tether to a world I wasn't ready to lose. I kept whispering to him, stories of us, hoping my voice could pull him back from wherever he was. Mrs. Carter returned, 2 coffees in hand despite my refusal. Drink, she said, pushing one toward me. You're no good to him if you collapse. I took it, the warmth grounding me slightly. She sat, her eyes on Eli, and started talking about his childhood, how he'd bandaged stray cats, how he'd decided at 10 to be a paramedic. He's always been saving someone, she said, her voice thick, even when it cost him. Her words cut deep. Eli's selflessness was what I loved and resented. I'd never admitted it, but part of me hated sharing him with the world. My test, that cruel gauntlet, was born from that selfish corner of my heart. I wanted him to choose me. Just once. Over the strangers he saved. Now, seeing him broken, I hated myself for it. A doctor came by, updating us. Eli's vitals were steady, but the concussion's effects were unpredictable. He might wake soon, or it could take days, she said. Days. The word echoed. A void I couldn't face. Mrs. Carter thanked her, calm as ever, but her hands shook as she sipped her coffee. I envied her strength. I thought of the night we'd fought, how I'd stood in our kitchen, yelling while Eli stood silent, his jaw tight. I'd wanted a reaction, anything to break his calm. Instead, he'd grabbed his keys and left for his shift. I hadn't known he'd be racing through Brooklyn, lights flashing, when a drunk driver changed everything. If I hadn't pushed him, would he have been more careful? The question gnawed at me, unanswerable. Caleb, Mrs. Carter said, her voice pulling me back. You're torturing yourself. Stop. I met her eyes, surprised by the fierceness there. Eli wouldn't want you drowning in this. He'd want you to be here when he wakes. I nodded, swallowing hard. She was right, but guilt was a stubborn beast. I turned back to Eli, brushing my thumb over his knuckles. Remember that time we got lost in Central Park? I said softly. You swore you knew the way, but we ended up by the same fountain 3 times. A faint smile tugged at my lips. You laughed so hard you couldn't breathe. I was so mad, but I loved you even more. Talking to him felt like praying, a plea to something bigger than me. Mrs. Carter stood, saying she'd check on the nurses. Alone again, I leaned closer to Eli. I'm not giving up on you, I whispered. I'll wait forever if I have to. The monitors beeped, steady and cold. I closed my eyes, imagining his laugh, his warmth, the life we still had to live. Hope was fragile, but it was all I had. Dawn crept through the hospital blinds, casting pale stripes across Eli's face. I hadn't slept, my body aching but my mind too wired to rest. His chest rose and fell, each breath a small victory, but his stillness was a knife twisting in my gut. I thought of the test again, how it had started so small a snide comment about his late shifts, a jab about missed anniversaries. I'd read somewhere that love needed pressure to prove itself, like a diamond in the rough. So I'd pushed, demanding he show me I mattered. Looking back, it wasn't a test of his love, but of my own insecurities. I'd wanted him to beg, to fight for me, but all I'd done was break us both. Mrs. Carter had stepped out to call family, leaving me alone with Eli. The ER was quieter now, the overnight chaos giving way to a weary calm. I studied his face, the bruise on his cheek now a deep purple. I wanted to touch it, to take his pain, but I was afraid I'd hurt him more. Instead, I talked, my voice hoarse. You remember our first fight. You left me a voicemail, singing that awful country song to apologize. I laughed so hard I forgot why I was mad. A nurse came by, adjusting Eli's fore. You're doing good, keeping him grounded, she said. He can hear you. You know. I nodded, clinging to that hope. When she left, I leaned closer, my lips near his ear. I'm sorry I doubted you, I whispered. You're the best man I know. Always have been. Memories flooded in Eli teaching me to cook his mom's lasagna, both of us covered in sauce, laughing until we couldn't stand. The way he'd look at me across a crowded bar, like I was the only one there. I'd taken it all for granted, letting my fears twist love into a battlefield. Now, I'd give anything for one more of those moments. Mrs. Carter returned, her eyes red but her voice steady. His sister's flying in tomorrow, she said. She's a wreck, but she'll be here. I nodded, grateful Eli had a family who loved him as fiercely as I did. You should rest, she added, eyeing my slumped posture. I shook my head. I can't. Not until he wakes up. She didn't push, just sat beside me, her presence a quiet strength. We didn't speak, but the silence was enough. I thought of Eli's courage, how he'd run toward danger while I'd run from my own heart. I'd called him the worst, but he was the best of us, brave, selfless, unwavering. I had to be better. For him. A flicker of movement caught my eye. Eli's fingers twitched again, stronger this time. My heart leapt. Eli, I said, louder, gripping his hand. His eyelids fluttered. Just a fraction, but it was enough. I looked at Mrs. Carter, her eyes wide with hope. We waited, breathless, for a sign he was coming back to us. Eli's eyelid twitch was a spark in the dark, igniting hope I'd barely dared to feel. I squeezed his hand, my voice trembling. Eli, I'm here. Please, come back to me. Mrs. Carter leaned forward, her breath catching, both of us hanging on that fragile sign of life. The hospital's hum felt distant, my world shrinking to Eli's face. I kept talking, recounting our best moments, the time we danced in our kitchen to a song neither of us knew, or when he dragged me to a rooftop to watch a meteor shower, his excitement outshining the stars. I needed him to know I remembered, that I cherished every second. A doctor checked in, noting the twitch with cautious optimism. It's a good sign, she said. His brain's responding. Keep talking to him. I nodded, tears blurring my vision. Mrs. Carter took over, her voice soft but firm, telling Eli about the time he'd saved a neighbor's dog from a frozen pond. You're too stubborn to give up, Eli Carter, she said. Don't start now? I thought of the fight again, how my words had driven a wedge between us. I'd been so caught up in my own hurt. I hadn't seen his. Eli never talked about the toll his job took, the lives he couldn't save, the nightmares that woke him at 3 a.m. I demanded he prove his love, but he'd been proving it every day, in ways I was too blind to see. Hours dragged on, the hospital clock mocking my impatience. I kept holding Eli's hand, my thumb tracing circles on his skin. I thought of the life we'd planned, simple, messy, ours. A house with a porch, a dog, maybe kids someday. I'd been scared of that future, of being enough for him. Now, I was terrified of losing it altogether. Mrs. Carter's phone buzzed. Eli's sister, confirming her flight. She'll be here by noon, she said, her voice steadier now. I envied her ability to keep it together. My emotions were a storm, guilt and love tangled in every thought. I leaned closer to Eli, whispering, Your sister's coming. You better wake up to see her, or she'll never let you hear the end of it. Another twitch, this time in his jaw. My heart raced. Eli, I said, louder. His fingers curled slightly, gripping mine. Mrs. Carter gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. I didn't dare breathe, watching his face for more. His lips parted, a faint groan escaping. It was the most beautiful sound I'd ever heard. Caleb. His voice was a rasp, barely audible, but it shattered me. Tears spilled as I leaned over him, my forehead against his. I'm here, I choked out. I'm right here. His eyes fluttered open, hazy but alive, finding mine. In that moment, the world was whole again. Eli's eyes, hazy and unfocused, locked onto mine, and I felt my heart stitch itself back together. Caleb, he whispered again, his voice rough but real. I gripped his hand, tears streaming. afraid to blink in case he slipped away again. Mrs. Carter was on her feet, calling for a nurse while her own tears fell. "You scared us. You stubborn boy," she said, her voice breaking with relief. Eli's lips twitched, a ghost of his old smile, and it was enough to make me believe in second chances. The nurse arrived, followed by a doctor, both moving with practiced calm. They checked Eli's vitals, asked him simple questions: his name, the year, what he remembered. His answers were slow, slurred, but he knew me, knew his mom. "The crash," he mumbled, wincing. "The ambulance, did they make it?" Even now, half conscious, he was thinking of others. "They're fine," the doctor said. "You took the worst of it." Eli nodded faintly, his eyes drifting back to me. I wanted to say everything: how sorry I was, how much I loved him, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I squeezed his hand, hoping he could feel it. The doctor gave us space, saying Eli needed rest but was out of immediate danger. Mrs. Carter kissed his forehead, whispering something I couldn't hear, then stepped out to call his sister. Alone with him, I finally spoke. "Eli, I'm so sorry," I said, my voice shaking. "What I said, it wasn't true. You're everything to me." He blinked slowly, his hand tightening in mine. "I know," he rasped. "I heard you, in there." He tapped his chest weakly, and I broke, sobbing into his shoulder. He'd heard me. All those hours I'd poured my heart out, begging him to come back. We sat in silence, the weight of the past day settling around us. I thought of the test, how I'd let my fears turn love into a weapon. I was scared, I admitted. Scared you didn't need me as much as I need you. Eli's eyes softened, even through the pain. "Caleb," he said, "you're my home. Always." His words were a balm, but they didn't erase my guilt. I'd hurt him, pushed him away when he needed me to hold on. I vowed to do better, to be the partner he deserved. The hospital room felt less like a cage now, more like a place where we could start again. Mrs. Carter returned, her face brighter. "Your sister's landing soon," she said. Eli nodded, his strength fading. "Rest," I told him, brushing his hair back. "We're not going anywhere." He closed his eyes, a faint smile lingering, and I knew we'd face whatever came next together. Eli's recovery was slow, a dance of small victories and setbacks. Days turned to weeks in the hospital, his broken ribs healing, his concussion fading, but his spirit unbreakable shone through. I stayed by his side, leaving only to shower or grab coffee, each moment away a tug at my heart. His sister, Maya, arrived that first day, her fierce hug nearly crushing me. "You kept him here," she said, her voice thick with gratitude. I didn't feel like a hero, not with the memory of my cruel words still burning. But I was learning to forgive myself, piece by piece, as Eli did so effortlessly. We talked more, Eli and I, in those quiet hospital hours. I confessed everything: the test, my insecurities, the fear I wasn't enough. He listened, his hand in mine, and when I finished, he said, "I'm not perfect either, Caleb, but I choose you. Every day." His words rebuilt something in me I'd thought was lost. The day he was discharged, the sun broke through Brooklyn's gray sky, a rare gift. We walked out together, his arm around my shoulders, my heart lighter than it had been in months. Back in our apartment, he found the shoebox of his sticky notes, grinning as he read one aloud. "Caleb, you're stuck with me. Deal with it." We laughed, and it felt like coming home. Our fight, the crash, the hospital, it all changed us. I learned to trust Eli's love, to see his selflessness as a gift, not a rival. He promised to balance his job with us, to let me in when the weight of it got too heavy. We were flawed, both of us. But love isn't about perfection, it's about showing up, even when it hurts. Months later, we took that trip to Maine, just us and the open road. On a quiet beach, waves crashing, I knelt and asked him to marry me. His yes was a whisper, a vow, sealed with a kiss under a sky full of stars. I'd called him the worst man alive once, but lying beside him that night, I knew he was the best me partner, my home, my everything. The test I'd given him was a mistake, born of fear, but it taught me the truth. Love isn't proven in ultimatums or cruel words. It's in the quiet moments, the choice to stay, the courage to heal. Eli taught me that, and I'd spend my life proving I'd learned it.